When Malik Henderson stepped into the courtroom that morning, the entire room seemed to pause for a beat, then burst into laughter. Not because of anything he said, but because of his presence. A black man, standing alone. No attorney by his side. No sleek leather briefcase. Just a worn-out suit with frayed shoulders and eyes that didn't know how to bow. Judge Robert Miller glanced at the name on the file, then looked up at Malik's appearance. He leaned back in his chair with a half-smile. "Representing yourself, Mr. Henderson?" A ripple of chuckles spread through the room. Logan Pierce, the bank's lawyer, nudged his assistant and winked. "Monday morning entertainment, huh?" Malik didn't flinch. He was used to being underestimated, but today was different. Today he hadn't come to plead for mercy. He'd come to expose something this entire system had tried to bury. And in just a few minutes, the people laughing at him wouldn't be able to laugh at all. Malik stood tall at the center of the courtroom, hands clasped tightly in front of him, eyes unwavering. On the outside, he looked like an ordinary man. But inside, he was ready for a battle no one but him believed he could win. Judge Robert Miller tapped his gavel lightly on the bench, not meeting Malik's gaze, just glancing over him like he might a petition from someone too insignificant to matter. "You're the defendant, and you're representing yourself?" he asked again, his voice dry, as if stifling a sigh. "Yes, Your Honor," Malik replied, his tone calm, almost unsettlingly so. Another round of murmurs stirred across the room. Logan Pierce, attorney for Newford Bank, made no effort to hide the disdain in his eyes. Dressed in a tailored suit, a gleaming watch catching the light at his wrist, he stepped forward like a man who'd already won before the trial even began. "This guy doesn't even have a law degree," he muttered to his assistant. "This'll be the fastest hearing I've ever had." Malik heard every word. They made sure he did. And they thought their contempt would shake him. But Malik had grown up in the projects, where silence was often the only shield you had. He knew the weight of judgment in a single glance. And he also knew the one most underestimated is often the one with the most to prove. The judge flipped through the case file, exhaling heavily. "This is a foreclosure case brought by Newford Bank, correct?" "It's about my grandmother's house, Grace Henderson," Malik said, steady. "And yes, Your Honor, I believe the seizure was unlawful." "Not belief, Mr. Henderson," the judge replied with a slight smirk. "Evidence. You think you can argue against a lawyer with nearly 20 years of experience?" The room fell into a brief taut silence. Malik tilted his head, just slightly. "I don't think, Your Honor." "I know." No one laughed. There was only a different kind of silence now, heavier, unfamiliar, when someone outside the law refused to bow. The judge raised an eyebrow, as if, for the first time, the man before him was starting to come into focus. "Very well. Let's begin." And with that, the real fight began. But Malik already knew this wasn't a trial for debate. This was a reckoning, a chance to drag into light a truth the entire system had tried to bury. Logan Pierce stepped forward like the courtroom was his stage, his voice, deep, measured, honed by hundreds of courtroom battles. "Your Honor, this is a case so straightforward it hardly requires the court's time." He turned slightly toward Malik, didn't even need to look at him directly to radiate contempt. "A man unwilling to accept the reality that his property was legally repossessed. By the book, by the process, there is nothing to dispute." He walked slowly, each word like a carefully laid carpet, each sentence emphasized with surgical precision. "The contract is clear. The signature is valid. The bank acted entirely within the bounds of the law. Regret, perhaps, but the law does not operate on emotion." Each statement landed like a small blade, slicing away any remnants of resistance. Or so he thought. Logan ended with a small, satisfied nod before returning to his seat. The look of a man who believed he'd just sealed the coffin shut. Malik sat still, expressionless, but his eyes, still the same as when he entered, sharp, steady, and unblinking. Then he stood, not to plead, not to make an emotional appeal, but to begin unfolding something that would steal the breath from the room. Mr. Pierce is right about one thing. The law is clear, Malik began, his voice calm, almost cold. But what I question is whether his client followed it. Logan frowned. The judge leaned forward, just a little. Malik pulled a neatly stapled packet from his file folder. I've spent the past 6 months reading hundreds of legal documents. Every clause in that contract. Every precedent in similar cases. And I found something off. He stepped forward, handing the packet to a court clerk. I'm submitting a formal request for discovery, because I believe the plaintiff is hiding something. Hiding what? Judge Miller asked, his tone no longer mocking. Malik turned toward Logan, who was now squinting slightly. Fraud. The word dropped like a stone into a still lake. The room fell silent. A few coughs, the creak of shifting chairs, but not a single laugh. Logan smirked, but the confidence in his eyes had dimmed. Ridiculous. Just a tactic to stall. Baseless. Malik didn't shrug, didn't react. He calmly walked back to his table, pulled out 2 copies of the original mortgage agreement, one from the bank's files, one from his family's records. He handed them both to the judge. Judge Miller, I'd like you to compare the signatures. Same person, my grandmother. But the documents were signed 3 months apart, and one of them isn't real. The judge leaned in. His eyes shifted, not glancing anymore, but truly examining. The doubt in them turning into pause. Focus, Malik continued, his voice lower, heavier now. 3 months after the first signature, my grandmother suffered a stroke. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. So tell me, Your Honor, who signed the second one? The question hung in the air like the first crack in a wall that Logan Pierce had believed was impenetrable. Judge Miller glanced over the 2 mortgage contracts in his hands, his brow furrowing deeply. He tilted the pages under the light, bringing them closer to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. Beside him, Logan Pierce began tapping his foot, his fingers drumming softly on his briefcase. The confidence he wore so easily at the start was starting to crack. Malik saw it, and he didn't stop. Your Honor, he said, voice calm but laced with cold precision, the signature discrepancy is just the beginning. What I uncovered after that is what convinced me this foreclosure wasn't just wrong. It was systematically wrong. He stepped forward again, producing a second, thicker file, its pages tabbed and marked with color-coded precision. I traced the entire loan's journey, from the day my grandmother signed with the original lender, to the moment the debt landed in the hands of the plaintiff. Malik handed 1 copy to the judge, another to the opposing counsel. Logan took it, his eyebrows tightening as he flipped through. My grandmother originally signed with Jefferson Savings. The loan was then sold to East River Finance, and finally, it was transferred to Newford Capital, Mr. Pierce's client. That's entirely standard practice in finance, Logan interjected flatly. Loans are bought and sold all the time. Malik nodded. Yes, as long as all accompanying documents are legally in order. He opened to a marked page, but of the 3 transfers, only 2 were properly documented. The final one, the transfer to Newford Capital, has no legally verified assignment record. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Judge Miller frowned. No assignment record? What exactly are you saying? Malik pointed to a line in the file. There's no seller signature, no notary seal, no transaction code. Legally speaking, Mr. Pierce's client never actually owned the debt. Logan shot to his feet. Objection! That's irrelevant to the legality of the foreclosure. On the contrary, Malik replied, eyes still on the judge. If you don't own the debt, You don't have the right to collect it or seize property. It's that simple. The air tightened like a drawn string. Silence wrapped around the courtroom, broken only by the faint tap of Judge Miller's pen against his desk. "Mr. Henderson," he asked slowly, now with more curiosity, and something like disbelief in his eyes, "how did you get access to these records?" "I submitted requests to all 3 credit bureaus," Malik answered. "Took 6 weeks for them to respond with a full debt history under my grandmother's name. Then I studied federal law on loan transfers, read every line of the TRI and RESPA Acts." Logan leaned back. His face had begun to sweat. Malik stepped forward once more. "I even contacted a former financial analyst who worked at Newford. He confirmed, without a valid assignment, the bank has no legal right to foreclose. Doing so is a violation of the law." Judge Miller nodded slowly, twisting his pen between his fingers. He turned to Logan. "Does your client possess the original assignment of rights?" Logan hesitated. Just a beat too long. "I'll need time to confirm with my client." Malik smiled faintly. "I can wait. But my grandmother can't wait to have her home back." Once again, silence blanketed the courtroom. But this time it wasn't indifference or ridicule. It was the beginning of belief. The air in the courtroom was thick now, dense, as if every breath had been pressed into silence. Malik stood tall, his voice ringing out, clear and steady. "Your Honor, I'd like to call a witness, the notary who signed off on the second version of my grandmother's loan agreement." Logan Pierce shot up from his chair as if he'd just taken a punch to the gut. "Objection," he snapped. "This witness was not on the original list." Malik turned to him, gaze steady. "I only found her 3 days ago, and what she has to say could change the entire course of this case." Judge Miller sat up straight, hands folded before him. "Name of the witness?" "Rachel Bennett, the notary listed on the supplemental loan document." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The doors opened quietly, and Rachel walked in. Blonde hair tied back, clutching a leather purse, eyes flickering between worry and resolve. She took the stand. Her voice was soft but firm. "My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm a licensed notary in this state." Malik faced her, his tone gentler now. "Ms. Bennett, do you recall notarizing an amended loan agreement for Grace Henderson?" Rachel glanced at Logan. His jaw was tight, his composure visibly strained. "Yes," she said. "Were you present when Mrs. Henderson signed the document?" Malik asked, barely above a whisper. Rachel froze. A pause stretched. Then she exhaled, slow and heavy. "No." A gasp came from the back row. Even Judge Miller leaned back in his chair, eyes widening. Malik pressed on. "Did you witness anyone else signing on her behalf?" "No," Rachel replied, shaking her head. "Then why did you notarize the document?" Rachel bit her lip, her hands clenched until the knuckles turned white. "A representative from the bank came to my office. The contract was already signed. They told me Mrs. Henderson had signed in front of them and that they needed it notarized immediately to meet a filing deadline. I didn't verify." Her voice broke. "I know it was wrong. I never imagined it would lead to something like this." The room fell into a stillness that felt like watching a slow, inevitable unraveling. Malik turned to Judge Miller. "Your Honor, under state law, notarizing a document without the signer present is a serious violation, one that renders the entire document legally void." Logan jumped up, voice sharp, but the force had drained from it. "Objection. This is speculative testimony. There's no evidence of intent to commit fraud." "You're wrong," Malik said, cutting in. "This proves the process was flawed, and if the process is broken, then there is no legal basis to foreclose on my grandmother's home." Judge Miller slammed the gavel once. His eyes moved from Rachel to Logan. "Ms. Bennett, are you aware of the legal consequences of your actions?" Rachel nodded, eyes brimming.
"I am, and I'm willing to accept them. But what happened to Mrs. Henderson was wrong."
That single sentence, quiet as a whisper, tore through the courtroom like wind ripping away a curtain. And for the first time, Logan had nothing left to say. The courtroom remained frozen in silence after Rachel Bennett's testimony. No one spoke, but the silence was so thick, so heavy, You could hear every breath drawn. Malik knew this was the moment to end it all. He pulled out one final document, its pages marked in red, sharp and precise, like the edge of a blade. "Your Honor," he said, and this time his voice wasn't that of a man defending himself. It was the voice of someone delivering a verdict. "Newford Bank didn't just do this to my grandmother." He stepped forward, handing the file to the court clerk. "I've investigated and found 3 other cases in this same county involving the same bank and the same suspiciously identical signature patterns." Judge Miller flipped quickly through the pages. His eyes sharpened with each turn. Malik continued, "All of them involved amended loan documents with questionable signatures. All were notarized by someone not present at the time of signing. And all resulted in families being forced out of their homes." Logan Pierce looked as if he'd turned to stone. A twitch flickered across his face. Sweat gathered at his temple. He opened his mouth as if to object, but the words never made it out. Malik turned to the judge and said slowly, "This wasn't an administrative mistake. It was a pattern, a repeatable process. And I believe if we dig deeper, we'll find many more cases that never saw the light of day." Judge Miller turned to Logan. "Mr. Pierce, do you have a response?" Logan stammered,
I need more time to verify."
"There is no more time," the judge cut in, voice hard now. "If the bank cannot prove legal ownership of the debt, if the evidence suggests a pattern of serious misconduct, then the foreclosure is invalid." He raised the gavel. Each strike echoed like thunder through the room. "This court rules
The foreclosure against Mrs. Grace Henderson was unlawful. The repossession order is overturned. Ownership is restored to the Henderson family."
Malik closed his eyes for a brief second, not from triumph, but from the quiet relief of knowing justice had finally listened. He turned to face Logan, the man who once laughed at him like he was a Monday morning joke. Now, that smile was long gone, and Malik didn't need to say a word, because in Logan's silence was the clearest admission of all. He had won. Malik stepped out of the courthouse, his footsteps heavy, but steady. The late afternoon sun spilled across the gray stone steps, stretching his shadow long behind him like a memory that refused to fade. He didn't celebrate, didn't raise his fists, didn't shout. He simply stood there, one hand resting gently on the file folder, the one that had followed him through 6 relentless months, sleepless nights, endless hours poring over legal codes, moments when giving up felt like the only option. A man approached. It was Judge Robert Miller. The arrogance from that morning had vanished. His voice was low, almost soft. "You made me rethink how I judge people, Henderson." Malik nodded. "You're not the only one." The judge paused. "Ever thought about studying law?" Malik let out a quiet laugh, not because the idea was absurd, but because it had never been the goal. "I don't need a title to stand up for the people I love." Judge Miller smiled, then nodded and walked away. Malik turned and made his way down the steps. There was no grand emotion, no swelling music, just one feeling, simple and certain. They didn't take my grandmother's home, not today, not ever.